So I would like to take this moment to introduce our speaker today, Angela Sorg. She's the Health and Human Sciences Educator for Purdue Extension in DeKalb County. Angela, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. So thank you, everyone, for attending again today. If this is multiple time of attending, or if this is your first time, definitely welcome. A couple of housekeeping things. Number one, I'm working off of 2 different monitors, and so half of my stuff is over here, and you all are over here, and my stuff is over here. So I promise I'm speaking with you and I'm engaged with you, but I may be just doing a little back and forth so I can kind of see where I am. And then the other thing is my twin 15-year-olds are having a virtual day today due to the weather. And so they're in high school in the other room, and sometimes with the bandwidth and with the connectivity, especially during an ice storm, it may be a little bit tricky. So if I happen to pop off, I'll try to get back on really quick again. So just hang out and we'll get it going as quick as we can. So I am so excited to kind of finish this series today on a topic that I am passionate about, and that is mental health and mental illness and all of those things. I am a licensed therapist, and so this is in my wheelhouse, and I could talk about this all day long, but I know we have a half hour and definitely want to end it. If you have any questions in the end that you want to ask me. So today we're going to talk about small steps to better mental health. If you have questions and you know how to put things in the chat box, please do that. And I believe Rachel, my cohort, is going to be monitoring that. And Rachel just asked me questions throughout the program if something comes in, because it might be about a slide that we're on. At the end of the program, we will share the survey. We are Extension and Purdue Extension, so we love to have that data if you're willing on what you learned. And then I'm also going to share my PowerPoint presentation with you. So if there is a community, or maybe if you happen to be a homemaker or any kind of group, if you would like to take this program and show people yourself or do it yourself, then that is completely fine. So we will be sending that out at a later date. So let's get started, and please ask questions if you have them along the way. Okay, so I kind of wanted to start with this. So what is mental health? I want to say this. We in our country have gotten way better on talking about mental health and mental illness as it obviously relates to ourselves. The stigma is less than what it ever has been in our country. I grew up in the days where we saw scary movies like Psycho, and we called people crazy, and all the things were scary, and we saw people in white straitjackets being taken in the paddy wagon to the mental health facility. And as a child growing up, that was actually very scary for me to see. So I had some very early connections of mental illness and mental health being kind of scary. And so as I became older and I started to see how things impacted my family or my friends or my community, I started to want to learn more about it. So a lot of this that we talk about in the mental health world is to help us reduce our stigmas, because if we've been taught a certain way, then we're probably going to think a certain way. So this is kind of to help do that too. So what is mental health? It includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. I'm going to simplify this in the next slide. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood to adolescence through adulthood. And the reason why it's important, our mental health, just as our physical health is important to pay attention to throughout our life, is because our life changes. I'm 45 years old, and I don't experience the same thing at 45 that I did at even 40 or 35 or 25. So our life issues change as we get older. And so therefore we kind of need to tweak things a little bit to help our mental health. So in a simplified form, I love to say it like this. Ooh, I didn't know that little heart danced. When I did this presentation, I had no idea. That's fun. So what is mental health? It's our ability to live, laugh, love, and play. And really when something starts to kind of go haywire, if our ability to laugh as it was before is really being hindered by something going on in our life, our ability to love as what we did before, play or live, if any of those things or a combination of those things are impacted, then we kind of know that something is kind of going awry. It's the same thing as if I start to feel a flutter in my heart when I've never felt a flutter in my heart, I'm probably going to go to the doctor at some point and say, something's different. So our mental health is no different than that. Okay, so I always want to make this distinction because when I'm talking about mental health, many times we connect the word mental health and mental illness, and that's fine to connect those two words, but they are very different. So they're not one and the same. So mental health is just like physical health. It is the act of taking care of ourselves so the chance of a larger issue decreases. Whereas mental health are the health conditions involving change in emotion, thinking, behavior, or a combination of these, kind of like what the previous slide said. And mental illnesses are associated with distress and or problems functioning in social work or family activities. And then mental health is actually very common. So I always like to make the connection that physical health is kind of conjoined with mental health, and then physical illness is conjoined with mental illness. So just because you're having stressors, or because if you are going through bereavement, if a loved one has passed away, or if there is some downtimes or you're having a struggle in your life, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a diagnosable mental illness. It just means simply that you're going through a hard time and a rough patch in your life. But once that storm is over or has decreased, then you're really able to kind of get back to your normal daily living. Whereas a mental illness is really going to impede you from doing your ability to live, laugh, love, and play. This next slide talks about how prevalent mental illness is. So 1 in 5 adults in America do experience an actual diagnosable mental illness. So there are many of us on the call today. So chances are one or more of us actually have a diagnosable mental illness, such as depression, anxiety, panic. There's a whole host of mental illnesses. Nearly 1 in 25 or 10 million adults in America live with a serious mental illness. So that means the serious mental illness would be something that is really hard to manage, and maybe a combination of medication therapy and talk therapy just isn't really helping too much, or we just haven't really found that great concoction for that person. And then maybe it affects their ability to have a job, or to have meaningful relationships, or to interact in our society the way that we would like to. And then this is always interesting. 1/2 of all chronic mental illnesses begin by the age of 14 and 3/4 by the age of 24. When we're talking about mental illnesses with our kiddos, it's really hard to detect at the age of 14, because if you have a kiddo who's struggling with anxiety, oftentimes we say, well, they've got a lot going on, their school is hard, their life is hard, everything social media is rough on them. If there's behavior problems, we say, oh, that's a typical teenager, and on and on. So we oftentimes miss our kiddos when we're looking at diagnosis. And so it's not necessarily that they're diagnosed by the age of 14, but it's but the presence of a mental illness or an underlying mental illness is possibly already there. So What decreases our mental health? I could go on and on about what decreases our mental health, but for the purpose of a half-hour program, we'll talk about these. So we're going to talk about each of these in a little more detail. So trauma, and I'm going to talk about that, loneliness, decrease in health, and then a lack of coping skills. When I was growing up, even, again, I said I'm 45, so I was born in 75. And so we didn't, at least in the environment that I lived in and the community that I lived in, we never in school, or we never really talked about healthy coping skills as it related to our sadness or our happiness or our anxieties, or if we had any traumas in our life. So if we didn't learn those growing up, then as adults, we're not going to really have a good pool of coping skills to kind of pull from. And pulling yourself up by the bootstraps is not necessarily a healthy coping skill. It can be, I guess, but it depends on how you're doing that. But a lot of times people are just like, well, just get over it. Or you should be over that by now. Or, well, I went through the same experience as you and I didn't have that reaction. Or if we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. So kind of burying our heads in the sand idea, which was actually very, very common, you know, up to several years ago. Okay, so these are some examples of trauma. So this is kind of the first one on our list. So 60 to 75% of people in North America experience a traumatic event at some point in their life. And these are just some examples of traumatic experiences. So bullying, harassment, physical, psychological, or sexual abuse, sexual assault, traffic collisions, childbirth can be traumatic, life-threatening illnesses, sudden loss of a loved one, being attacked, being kidnapped, acts of terrorism, natural disasters, and war. So again, those are just some of the traumas that we may have experienced in our lifetime. The one thing about trauma is it is a trauma to you if you perceive it to be threatening to you. So if I am in a car or a traffic collision, as one of the examples on here, and maybe I'm the driver and my passenger is obviously the passenger, and if I feel that my life was threatened during that traffic collision, but my passenger really kind of was just like, ooh, that stunk, that was horrible, then they're not necessarily going to have any resulting impact from that if they don't perceive it as a life-threatening traumatic event, but I will. So same traffic collision, same car, same problem. One considers it to be trauma and one does not. So also trauma, when it really starts to impact people and starts to become an issue or a red flag for you, is if after the traumatic event, it has lasted for longer than 4 weeks. So that means you can't sleep, your eating habits change, you wake up with terrible nightmares, you can't get into a car again because you're so scared that the collision will happen again, or you feel out of control. You start to be kind of bitey with people because you're just real jittery. So those are all kinds of things that happen after a traumatic event. I'll bring up COVID right now. So the problem and issues with COVID is, and you'll see this as I start talking about my next slides, most events that are traumatic, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So in most situations, so in a car crash, there's really where the car crash stops. So the traumatic event has ended. With COVID, what's happening to us now is we're not able to really rest from the constant barrage of information, the fact that people are dying, the fact that people are sick, that we can't see our loved ones. So we're really not able to decompress, to be able for our brains to really process the traumas that we're going through. And so, for example, with our healthcare workers in the mental health field, we're not seeing them needing a whole lot of trauma therapy right now because they're still in the midst of it. But when it calms down and when they're not constantly bombarded with it, then we'll start to see reactions from that. I mean, we are seeing reactions, but not as much as what we'll see as it happens, as COVID starts to look different than what it does now. So I was telling my colleagues before we did this, so during the inauguration, I got all excited about America. And so I decided to be very historical. And so I thought it would be kind of fun to do a timeline of all the possible traumas. And I say possible because you yourself may not think that any of these are traumas, but some people will. So of all of the things that the generations have been through from 1940 on, and I'm going to come back to why I chose to do such a broad timeline from 1940 to 2021 now. And so I'll come back to why I did it. But so these are just, I'm not going to go through everything, but this is just an idea of some of the, again, possible traumatic things that generations have been through since 1940. And if I have a date wrong, I so am sorry. I got it off the internet, but it was research based. So I'm just saying. Okay. So these are timeline of events. You're going to notice some, you're going to notice the Asian flu and the flu pandemic on there. Again, President Kennedy assassinated. I remember my mom talking about that. Watergate, Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated. This is from 1979 to 1995. I remember, definitely, I remember the Oklahoma City bombing. I remember Exxon Valdez, and I definitely remember where I was when the Challenger exploded. I was in school. And that was very scary. I think I was in 5th grade at that point, and that was a very scary thing for me to see. So I do remember that. This next one is from 99 to 2012. I definitely remember Columbine High School, and obviously World Trade Centers. So those are some those are just some more timeline. And so this is really from, I should say 2012 to 2019 on to 2020 with the flu pandemic and now. So these are, again, some of the things that I definitely remember where I was, remember how I felt during those times. So I'm going to come back to the reason why I put this timeline on after a couple of slides. So if you remember that little step down thing that I did earlier, the second one was loneliness. I feel like we can all relate to this one right now as it speaks. We're lonely for our families. This loneliness, humans are pack animals. We're not meant to be alone. We like our people for the most part, and we hopefully like our families. And I think never, at least in my lifetime, have I ever been more appreciative of actually physically seeing people. I feel like I took that for granted, and I don't feel like I take that for granted now. Even my colleagues, I miss them immensely. To be in a room with them together, all doing something, even going to lunch, or I haven't seen my mom, who is elderly. She lives in Kentucky, and I haven't seen her in now a year physically, and that makes me sad, and I know that makes her sad. So again, if I allow, or if I start to see that my sadness due to missing people is increasing and impacting my ability to live, laugh, love, and play, then I know I should probably get some extra help or do some different things to help that sadness. Decreases in health. It's estimated that 20% of people aged 55 years and older experience some type of mental health concern. The most common conditions include anxiety, severe cognitive impairment, and mood disorders such as depression and bipolar. The severe cognitive impairment is going to be more of the Alzheimer's or a dementia or something like that. So these are just some examples of how our health, very few examples of how our health can decrease, and that is decrease in mobility. If you aren't as mobile as what you were before, that's hard to deal with. Increase in medications, it's hard to figure out when, how, where, why. I don't know, I get my notifications from CVS that something is available, and it pretty much, I don't know, I get annoyed with that. Sometimes it's nice because I remember it, but it's also annoying if it's like a medication that I had like 4 years ago and I don't need anymore. Oh, I have decrease in mobility on there twice. I'll take that out of there. Sorry about that. Caring for a parent, if you're in a position where where you are now the caretaker for your parent, increase in physical elements, and then increase in doctor's appointments. Those can be confusing, especially now during COVID. Who's allowed to go with you? What time? Do you have to stand outside and call in? Are you allowed to go in, wearing a mask? All of the things that are a life change for us. And then a lack of coping skills. So by and large, physical health is more straightforward and often more tangible than mental health. But over the course of the past decade, there's been increased willingness to recognize mental health as an essential part of one's well-being. On Good Morning America this morning, there was a study that had linked our heart health with our mental health. And so again, they're starting to make that connection. When you go into a doctor, you expect a diagnosis and some type of treatment at the time. The mental health world is not like that. So oftentimes people get confused as to what that is. So these are some of our lack of coping skills. So not talking about mental health. It's okay to talk about mental health. Just because you talk about mental health or being sad or anxious doesn't mean that you have a diagnosable mental illness. If you start to have issues, it doesn't always mean that you need to go to therapy. It just might mean that it may not be appropriate for you. It may mean that you just need to increase some healthy coping skills, and then you're good to go after a period of time. It also doesn't mean that you're going to be put into a mental health hospital. And there's definitely very unique situations where that happens. But again, growing up, I always thought if I talked about my mental health, or if I talked about being scared or anxious or worried, I was like, oh no, I'm going to get put in a straitjacket, and I don't want to do that. Access to care. So the mental health world, it is terribly disproportionate to the people that need mental health care versus how many therapists are actually out there in the world. And then, so even when you do call, you probably, especially at this point, looking at about a 3 or 4 month period before you have to wait to even get seen. So that's why it is important for us to increase our healthy coping skills during that period of time. Decrease in mobility. You may not have the ability to get to see someone, but now with telehealth, Indiana used to not, insurances used to not pay in Indiana for us to have mental health, used to have therapy via the internet or teletherapy, and now that has changed, and I don't see that going back. So you can do therapy in the comfort of your own home, just like we're doing this program. Not giving ourselves permission to not be okay. As a mom, sometimes I have to give myself permission to do something for myself, or I have to give myself permission just to simply not be okay for the day and not know how to deal or to manage with something. And then uncertainty about what coping skills will help. So I'm sad, but I don't know what's going to help. So I don't know what to do. So in a 2014 study, this has been a while, but it compared coping skills in seniors who were depressed with seniors who had good mental health. And what they found was that these adaptive strategies were linked to a decrease in loneliness and depression, while maladaptive strategies were linked to an increase in mental health problems. So these are the most common adaptive skills that really set people up to decrease or to kind of build themselves up as far as it goes, their mental health. So self-distraction. So For example, I'm going to not necessarily watch the TV all the time, and how terrible the news can be sometimes. Emotional support from friends, family, if you have a faith community, positive reframing. So I had a horrible day. Instead of thinking all of the horrible things, is I had a good day, and these are the things that were positive, because there's always a positive. Acceptance. We have to accept right now that obviously COVID is here. We can't control that. And so we accept it, and then we deal accordingly. Planning. So you have to do some planning. I know that today is going to be a rough day, so I'm going to set myself up the best way I possibly can. Humor. We use humor in my home all the time. It helps us laugh. It releases endorphins when we do. It helps us kind of almost make fun of ourselves in a way. Like if we're taking something way too seriously, then it helps us regroup and reframe and think, okay, it's not horrible. Okay, it is horrible, but it's not horrible. So we laugh in our home all the time. And then religion. If you are of a faith community, religion is also something that is extremely adaptive, because again, that links us to a larger community that's not just ourselves. So just a couple more slides here as we're kind of nearing our time. So the reason I did that timeline is because the generations that have lived from 1940 until now are extremely resilient. And being resilient means being able to adapt and bounce back when something difficult happens in our lives. I am from Kentucky, and I come from a population where we have a massive, immense respect for our elders and our community, and we learn from them. And I feel like this is no different in the fact that we really need to be looking at older generations and how dealing, for example, with the pandemic, because if you have been alive from 1940 until now, you've been through all of those things that I had listed on the timeline. And so every time those things happen, your resiliency to deal with the next trauma is even greater. Or it could be, oh, I didn't deal with maybe this thing, but I still learned some things that will help me with deal with the next thing. One of the things that I love when we go, or if I have to go anywhere like to where there's a waiting room, I see people who did not grow up with cell phones have the ability to sit there and look around and people watch and turn a square, a carpet square into a story, or can stare at the wall for 20 minutes and just sit there and think. Or but the generation who have grown up with phones, it's this. And I'm thinking, that's okay, that's great if you're learning stuff, but I feel sad for the generations who can't turn a carpet square into a story. That makes me sad. And so I love watching when brains are moving like that. So that's kind of fun. So this next one is just, again, a picture of resiliency and how we manage all of those life events that come up. It really does help us. So these are all things that they seem like very like, okay, well, board games, how is that going to increase my mental health? It does, because it helps you reframe. It helps you laugh at times if you're losing or winning. It helps your mind stay active. There's all of these things that we never think about as things that we just do that will actually increase our mental health and our coping skills. So board games, card games, creative activities, drawing, writing, or playing an instrument, gardening. You can take out a lot of aggression on some dirt, let me tell you. Yoga and other exercise classes, walking, getting vitamin D, going outside when you can, and breathing the air in and getting some of that good vitamin D. Book clubs, reading or books on tape. volunteering, educational classes such as this one, talking about how we feel. It's okay to talk about how we feel. Getting enough sleep, exercise regularly. Exercise does not have to be high cardio, you know, all of that. It can be lifting your arms or sitting in a chair and moving. Eat balanced meals, reduce caffeine and alcohol consumption, slowly count to 10 when anxious. That helps just kind of lower your anxiety. Listen to music to calm down, play with a pet, meet family per safety guidelines, and then write letters for friends and family. Carolyn, my colleague on here, she is so great about sending cards and birthday cards and sympathy cards and are you okay cards, and I love that. So those are all things that we can do again. My 15-year-olds love getting handwritten letters from their grandparents. So that's, again, helping the next generation be able to feel what that is like when they get a handwritten letter. And then I love the Golden Girls, so therefore I love Betty White, and she just turned 99. So I think we could probably learn from her, keeping the learning from our elders going on. So this is how she says to embrace life, and we'll end on this. Keep yourself busy. And these are quotes from her. It's not hard to find things you're interested in, but enjoy them and indulge them. And I think that keeps you on your toes. Always stay optimistic. I know it sounds corny, but I try to see the funny side and the upside, not the downside. Forget numbers. I never thought about age much. I learned that at my mother's knee. Age was not important. It was where your head was. And then remember to treat yourself. Abigail, who's a registered dietitian, close your ears on this one. Depriving yourself of your favorite food isn't sustainable or fun. White says that she always gives into her cravings when it comes to two things, vodka and hot dogs. So I love Betty White, and I think she just really has a good grasp on life, and I think that's really cool. So that really, these are my resources for if you get this PowerPoint. These are the resources, and then that's the end. So I guess I'm going to ask if anyone, we've gone over, but if anyone has any questions, I would love to answer those. I'm going to stop sharing my